Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Venom. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you show the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
I don't know why I'm laughing. On this podcast, we talk about games, but also movies. And today's movie is in keeping with our tradition of basically just reviewing all the comic book movies that come out. Venom. Starring Tom Hardy, directed by, I think, Ruben Fleischer, published by Sony. All right. I don't even know where to start.
Well, let's start with our spoiler-free review because, as with all of these reviews, it will be very spoiler-heavy. And so let's do non-spoiler reviews first, and then we'll give a spoiler warning. Why don't you go first, Buddy?
Okay. So I think Venom is very bad, but it does that thing that The Room does, where it's so bad that it's also funny, in a way. I don't think anybody really cared about this movie except for maybe Tom Hardy, who seems to kind of get into it. Also, the actors seem to get fairly into it. I don't think anybody's super phoning it in or anything like that. But boy, there are just some decisions in this film that are mind-boggling.
Yeah, I had said it yesterday, but it's a glorious pile of trash.
Yeah, it is Catwoman level bad. It is Green Lantern level bad, I think, but it has that special spark of weird that just makes it. I just laughed a whole lot.
Yeah, no, I nearly busted the gut, and I don't think it's quite The Room, right? Because it has some intentional jokes that I think were pretty funny, just maybe in weird places and just like you said, some weird decisions, but
I also don't think
I was gonna say I would recommend going to see this movie for the laughs. Don't go expecting a super serious movie, but I think it's funny enough that it's worth seeing. This might become my new go-to dumb movie to watch. I've watched Mortal Kombat a dozen times, not because it's good, but because it's hilarious.
It is like The Room insofar as I think it has the potential to become a bad movie night cult classic sort of movie. But I think The Room was an earnestly made movie made by an inept man, right? I think, Tommy Wiseau was trying really hard with The Room. I don't think anybody was really trying super hard for this movie. It's kind of, I don't know why. It's just funny. I just laughed a whole lot.
Yeah.
My theater was also kind of into it.
Yeah, mine too.
Which I was really surprised about because I thought some stuff was hella dumb.
Yeah, I mean, it was very dumb, but there was one point during a quiet scene that I just started cracking up because of the absurdity of the movie. But I think this might be a good place to put a spoiler warning before we jump too hard into it. So spoilers for Venom, possibly spoilers for other superhero related movies that have come out, or just other movies. Probably spoilers for Batman v Superman because we can't avoid talking about that movie ever. If you want to see any of those movies and not be spoiled, skip the rest of this, I guess. Maybe skip to the end and listen to our personal updates, but we don't usually have a reliable timestamp for that. So, travel at your own risk. So getting into it, what I want to say a couple of things that I thought were good, right? Like I said, I thought
sure.
There was some legitimately, a couple of legitimately good jokes, in there. I forget exactly what they were off the top of my head, but the thing I really want to focus on, I actually thought that the symbiont fight between Riot and Venom was actually really cool looking.
Really, I hated that. I thought that was bad. It was black on gray on black because it was at night, and I was just this is the definition of muddled action. There was some stuff in there that I thought was actually okay. I will say, but
so I totally get that, and I do agree with that, but I liked kind of the concept and the execution on the parts where they're the two suits are fighting each other, and then Eddie and the CEO guy are fighting each other inside. Like, I thought that was just like a cool idea, and
yeah. I think that's where it got good, where when Riot was trying to rip the suit off of Eddie.
Yeah.
I think that, like, basically when they were doing stuff with kind of like the goopiness of the two suits fighting each other, I thought that was cool and interesting. But that only really happened once they got like up vertical on the rocket a little bit, and all this stuff horizontal on the rocket was just like bad. Mostly because it was black on gray at night.
Yeah, I can go along with that. Yeah. But yeah, I think those are the things that I think were really stuck out at me.
I liked Riz Ahmed. I liked a lot of the casting in this
movie.
Oh
yeah, I'll give you that too. Yeah,
because it was very kind of out of left field, and you typically don't see Riz Ahmed in this kind of role, like, you know, because he is so like sort of quiet and soft spoken. You know, this is like his role is a role that gets played by, you know, middle-aged white guys with gravitas, right? Like Bryan Cranston. And so I think probably the best thing that Venom ever did was cast Riz Ahmed and go with kind of his character, like, you know, like his natural strengths into that character.
Yeah, he definitely nailed like Silicon Valley visionary type. You know, kind of like aspects of Elon Musk and whatever.
I felt like Elon Musk must be sitting in a theater watching this movie and be like, yo, this whole movie is subtweeting me. Like, it felt like that whole thing was like a direct call out of Elon Musk in particular.
Yeah. No, I feel that. Although, yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's a bit far to suggest that like Elon Musk would be like killing people, but I mean, but that's just kind of typical, like, you know, science fiction, man play gods type stuff.
God, did I think anything else was good? This movie didn't really have themes, but insofar as the theme, I kind of wish that they leaned into this idea a little bit more, which is that Venom is not a good person. He is, you know, clearly a, you know, kind of corrupt jerk. But in the comics, for instance, Venom thinks of himself as a superhero a lot of the time. And he doesn't understand why Spider-Man is coming after him or whatever. But it is because of stuff like, you know, biting people's heads off or whatever. So he kind of does that like Punisher thing where he like crosses the line, and like that's part of what makes him bad. But Eddie Brock legitimately thinks that he is, you know, helping people and saving lives and all this other kind of shit. So I liked what we got of that, and that the movie didn't shy around the fact that Venom was biting people's heads off. But I also kind of wish that it went a little bit harder, you know, on that stuff. I feel like maybe they just couldn't get away with like an anti-hero main character in that sense.
Yeah, they also made some really like weird decision, like you called it out yesterday, and I totally agree with you. Like like Venom's like, this could be your only a chance to apologize to her.
I said, what the fuck, in the theater when he said that, and the whole theater started bursting out laughing because we all had this collective realization. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
is it his therapist? I don't understand. What? How does it know that he needs closure? Like, is there like some chemical in his brains that like he's reading? I mean.
But part of it too is they were super inconsistent about how the symbiotes worked, right? Like, initially it seemed like he knew he like Venom knows a lot more about Eddie than, like that he has some like access because he's melded with him. But they play off of that, and they also like, you know, like the experiment stuff. Like the symbionts die. Like symbionts die if they can't find a host, except for apparently Riot, who can survive in Asian women and tiny girls for any amount of time.
Can I talk about that? Because that is the dumbest thing, and I can totally see the like cutting room floor of what happened. Like, I'm pretty sure that the moment where Riz Ahmed bulks up into Riot for like Eddie when he's restrained for the first time. That's supposed to be a surprise, right? That's supposed to be like a surprise reveal, like, oh, this whole time Riz Ahmed has been bonded with the symbiote, and and he's trying, and that's why all of this stuff is, like that's why all this stuff is happening. But they completely undercut that plot twist or anything along those kinds of lines, because they have this like weird thing where Riot is moving through Southeast Asia, and then these Asian women into the little girl who inexplicably just shows up in the depths of the lab that we've seen is incredibly like secure and locked away.
Yeah, right?
How did she get there? You know what I mean?
And his response isn't like, his response is like, are you lost? Like,
yeah, I got lost. Right, what? I can't handle this. I was just, I couldn't handle that, dude. Oh my god. And it suggests that the symbiote is like somehow aware and cognizant of the deepest machinations of the corporation, and it's like, how did the symbiote learn this shit? Did it watch CNN in Asian people bodies in Southeast Asia and learn that, oh, the Life Foundation is sending these rockets up to go do things, and that's what we were on the rocket, and now we can use his other you know what I mean? Like, all of that, there's nothing of that. It just,
there's a throwaway line, right? Like, that this was planned. Like, presumably they're like an advanced squad for like that they intended to be caught, to be brought back to Earth. And it's not super satisfying, but
yeah,
it's just like a lot of details that you fill in yourself, right? Like, somehow they figured out about the planet, and they figure they jump on the spaceship. Again, that goes at odds with like Venom, like not understanding like anything that's happening on the planet. But what else?
I think the most accurate tweet I saw about Venom was that Tom Hardy was simultaneously going for an Oscar and a Razzie with the same performance. Because boy, did he really go for it.
Yeah, that was a super fucking hammy performance. I fucking loved it. Right?
I loved it too. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was so funny. Especially, I could probably just sit there and watch like Eddie weirdly talk to the symbiote all day.
Yeah, right.
Just all day long like that. Oh my god, that was just so funny.
I like the last part where he's just like walking down the street talking to himself, and everybody's like looking at him like he's a fucking crazy person.
See, this is the crazy thing about a Venom movie. This is what is just so bonkers about Venom. Venom is a bizarro version of Spider-Man, right? Like, this is what's like, the suit was the Spider-Man suit for 8 years. Then, the suit is actually killing Peter Parker, and then you introduce this like inverted, dark, reflection of Peter Parker, Eddie Brock, the unscrupulous, reporter, photographer, who's doctoring his photos. This was in the early 90s, before that was normal. Who's doctoring the photos that he's taking and all this other stuff. And then, Peter goes into the bell tower and debonds from Venom, and Venom finds his way to Eddie Brock, and then all of a sudden, now you have a big bulk, you have Spider-Man, and you have a bigger, bulkier Spider-Man with, like, the powers of this fucking symbiote suit or whatever. So, like, this is basically like if Warner Brothers was like, man, you know who needs their own movie? Bizarro. But we can't mention Superman or interact with Superman and the Superman mythos at all. And, like, that's the foundation of our movie. That's what like, Venom is. So there's just no way this movie is good, even if it is, like, just because of, like, the contract bullshit between Spider-Man and, like, the MCU and Sony.
So I will say that, like, I don't think that this movie can't be good. Like, I thought they did a reasonable job with kind of like the like very anti-hero-ish nature of it, and like I think you could have done that better. I think that's where Venom lives. Like, basically, this is a Spawn movie, with the Venom name slapped on it, maybe, if that makes sense. like I get your point, and I think he's a better character, um kind of in reflection of Spider-Man, but I think it can work. Speaking of which, I was for like when the second post credit scene, which is meanwhile another universe and goes into the Spider-Verse trailer,
Yeah.
which looks awesome by the way. I was hoping, like for a half second, I hoped that it was going to be like footage from like the Avengers series, and like that was going to be like the link reveal, but because I think that would be really cool. That if you could like if they integrated Venom into Avengers somehow, I don't know how you do it, or the MCU somehow. I don't know how you would do it without it being like goofy, but
yeah, especially because like San Francisco just got completely fucked up by like Ant-Man.
yeah.
I'm not. Do you know why everything is set in San Francisco? Do you, as a, former San Franciscan?
I don't. So it's in California. I would have to guess that it's very distinct. It's a very distinctive town. It's also
Right.
like within relative closeness to Los Angeles, right? And I feel like you can get good B-roll, right? That's what happened with The Room, right? Like they spent a bunch of time just it's like, oh, we can just do the San Francisco hills. That's fine. It instantly establishes where you are. Yeah, and like I recognized when they were doing the driving scenes, I knew a lot of the places they were going to, and I don't think it connected properly.
Really? Because I felt like a lot of that was just like Atlanta.
Just like what?
Because you know how like films, so like a lot of films shoot in Atlanta now because Atlanta gives these like giant tax credits.
Yeah.
To like to make a film industry happen there or whatever. And I felt like a lot of the scenes in this movie, I guess I almost felt like they were a little like, I don't know if I have a good enough sense for when it specifically swapped between them.
So the chase scenes were definitely on parts of San Francisco that I recognized.
Okay.
The other big thing about integrating that would cause a problem is I am positive that the area where the like Violife Corporation or whatever it is was in a shot somewhere in Ant-Man. Like that's
oh yeah that is way too iconic. Definitely.
Yeah it's like right over the bridge. Like that's like when you were looking at the Golden Gate Bridge from the San Francisco side, that's the mountain in the backdrop.
Yeah, isn't that the park? Isn't that all national park?
I think so. I think it used to be an old military installation too. There's some like old like structures there, but it's mostly just a hiking area.
Yeah.
Pristine, very beautiful.
Yeah, because I've always wondered why there wasn't like more quote unquote city on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and then I learned that like there's a big ass state park there.
Yeah. Yeah, it also the rain's weird over there too.
And then they go to the top of that one building that's like the whatever that pyramid building is.
Yeah, I forget what building that is, but yeah. Now they look right over the whole city.
Yeah, I thought this movie had some shockingly bad editing too. For instance, I really enjoyed how Eddie walked into the convenience store in the middle of daytime and walked out 4 hours later at night. Like there was a lot of stuff like that I felt was not the best. Nobody cared.
Yeah, it's those things you let slip because you're just like enjoying this fun goofball ride somehow. Like not the movie.
I have to say that the thing I was most concerned about was that they had cut the turd in the wind line, because that was what everybody made fun of when that trailer came out. Everybody was making fun of Turd in the Wind because it was so dumb. It was such a stupid. And I know it's from the comics. Okay, fine, whatever. And I'm typically that guy that's like, oh, well, it's from the comics, right? But like, no, like, okay, seriously, that line is dumb and very cringy. And I was like, oh no, they cut it from the movie. And then right at the end, that's when it came back, and he says like the Turd in the Wind thing, and I was just laughing my ass off. And I don't know how infectious that laughter was, but everybody in the theater thought that it was really funny that that's how they ended the movie with
I also think that line fits pretty well with that Venom, right?
Yeah.
Like his kind of like weirdness, like, like it, like, menacing, but a little bit like goofy, a little bit off kilter. I'm kind of a loser on my home planet.
Oh my god, I laughed so hard when he said that. And I understand what they were going for, and I appreciate it because, like, as a person who responds to stakes, right, that's a stakes-raising moment. Here's Riot, and he's making metal out of his own symbiote, and he's, like, cutting... I mean, he's just, like, for no reason at all, lopping all of the heads off of all of the scientists. Actually, I shouldn't say for no reason at all. It's for a very obvious reason. It's for the reason that why the fuck doesn't anybody call the cops when they see two symbiotes fighting on the fucking rocket ship?
Yeah.
But, like, he, like, lops all of these, like, heads off or whatever. And so, obviously, like, Riot is much more powerful than the Venom symbiote is. I thought it was just so funny to hear the Venom symbiote say, well, I'm kind of a loser.
Yeah, and it's also like just the weakest excuse for him to be against the people that he came with. Like the explicit reason he came to the planet.
Yep.
It's like, what?
I was very confused about that too, because, like, they did this whole thing with and at first I was kind of like, oh well, like, he's eating Eddie and they're gonna have to do something with how, like, oh well, now Eddie's gonna have to keep eating heads because he's a vampire now and he's got to start sucking blood someday or else he's gonna die because the symbiote is going to, like, eat all of his organs or whatever. But they completely swerved that, like, interesting kind of deal with the devil plot point, right, where Eddie bonds with the symbiote and is forced to do gruesome acts of cannibalism in order to keep the symbiote from devouring him. And just kind of were like, oh, I just did that because I wasn't friends with you, but now we're friends, so I'm not going to eat your liver anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't know if that was the, like, I didn't get the sense that was, like, the reason that, like, he was, like, I didn't get the intention that Venom was intentionally killing Eddie. I got the impression that was just kind of like a side effect. And that, I don't know, I just thought I thought that whole plot point was very poorly explained, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, they talk about how he's dying, and Venom says, I can fix it, and that's the end of it. Apparently that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was actually hoping that there would be something kind of along the lines of, like, fuel that, like, the symbiote would need to, like, in order to keep the powers and, like, the suit working correctly, Venom would continually need to bite faces and eat brains, in order to, like, keep his, like, protein high or something kind of along those lines. And so, like, hypothetically, you could tire out the suit or whatever if it like, if he's doing all this work to protect Eddie, but Eddie isn't feeding it, kind of thing.
But apparently by the end of the movie, the suit likes tater tots and chocolate.
I know. I was like, because they specifically mention how they feed it enough nutrition to, like, keep an elephant alive or whatever, but It's not working because it can only feast on, like, organs or something. And I was like, oh, because that's where the genesis of this, like, plot point kind of came up with, and I was like, oh, that's kind of clever.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that you could explain away with, there was imperfect synthesis. Although apparently that's not as restrictive as we think because, like I said, Riot keeps that one old Malaysian woman alive for 6 months, right? Because he takes control of her.
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before he goes into the kid, right? I was just kind of expecting a character to show up at some point and, like, them to flash the eyes and be like, oh, I didn't think you needed to explicitly I thought that's what the time skip was going to be like. You didn't need to explicitly show how Riot got from Malaysia to San Francisco. You just have a character show up and flash the eyes and be like, it's been a reasonable amount of time, right? Like,
yeah.
This makes some modicum of sense. Especially since, like, apparently that woman's just been walking to the airport for 6 months.
Yeah, after she murdered a bunch of people in a marketplace, in a crowded marketplace.
Well, he was technically in the hospital worker's body. when he did the murder.
Oh, when he murdered people,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
he switched to the old woman's body.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was so dumb.
Yeah.
I really think that there is some cutting room floor. Tom Hardy is quoted as saying that about 40 minutes of the movie got left on the cutting room floor, and I would be so interested to see what they cut.
Yeah.
To put in this like weird subplot for like how Riot gets into fucking Riz Ahmed.
Yeah,
Because like I feel like if we had no indication of how Riot got into Riz Ahmed and then boom, he's there, I think that actually might have been a pretty effective plot twist. Like I don't know if like nitpicky fanboys on the internet would be willing to kind of go with that, or if they would be like, well, how did Riz Ahmed's character get the fucking symbiote in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you would like. I feel like you could do the reveal and then do like a post like explanation, right? Like,
oh yeah, like, you know, that rocket wasn't the first rocket I sent up. I sent one up 3 years ago, and it brought back this symbiote that bonded to me, and now I need to go get, you know, the rest of the fucking symbiotes or something like that.
Yeah, or like, you know, you like there's a reveal and then you see like in like some room somewhere there's the body of like the Asian worker that they brought into the lab or something, right? Like
yeah.
I think you could have done that effectively. I also it's interesting because I feel like even if we got like a director's cut version of this, I don't think it stops it from being like you know, gleaming trash, right? Like I think it just kind of fills out some of those plot holier points, right? Like, does that make sense?
I don't like if you keep like the interaction between Tom Hardy and Venom and all that stuff the same. No, I'm super with it. In a certain sense, I was actually kind of on board with Venom when it was doing that sort of. I mean, I wasn't really on board with it, but because it lost so many points early, just like doing dumb shit. But like, I kind of like that first fight scene where Eddie doesn't know what he's doing, and like in a weird way, Tom Hardy very much like sold me on the fact that like, oh, my body's not under my control, and now I'm kicking the shit out of these like SWAT bros or whatever. But then I felt like the action got too goopy, and it lost me from there.
I thought it was neat because he didn't do the typical like, whoa, what's happening type of thing, right? He just kind of was like, yeah, okay, I'll roll with it. We'll figure it out later. And I thought that was just interesting because it was different, right? I think it fit very well with like that Eddie Brock personality that they built for him. My understanding is that Eddie Brock's kind of just an asshole in the comics. Is that correct, or am I?
Yeah, his like whole thing is just that he's like a dick.
Yeah, and they have a bit of that here, right? Like, obviously, like going into your fiance's work documents for like that.
Yeah, that was kind of unethical.
Just a little bit. You know, and you know, it shows that he's a greedy bastard.
Well, I was actually really excited when they kind of set up this thematic idea of like, you did this to you. I thought that was what they were going to kind of like, that this was going to kind of be about Eddie Brock's sort of like Faustian deal with the devil, and that like the ending would be tragic because like Michelle Monaghan would like look at Eddie and just be like, you've turned yourself into a monster or whatever, and kind of like go that sort of route with it. But then they didn't, and I thought it was very lame and dumb.
I don't know. I like the kind of like, I don't think it's good, but I really like this like deranged rom-com subplot, right? Like fucking
probably the best part of the movie, I think, was when he like crashes their fancy dinner, and he ends up like eating the raw lobster out of the tank. Like, I don't know if that was just purely like Tom Hardy sells me on like his weird manic interpretation of like this character and like what's going on. But I had a ball with that. I thought that was super funny.
Yeah, I also liked Dan's character, right? Like, you know, like he's a real bro, right? Like this guy's my patient.
Yeah.
But kind of along with that, right? Like this manic rom-com bit, like the end of the movie where Venom's like she doesn't know we are going to win her back. Ha ha ha. Right? Like, I don't know why, but that just works so well for me. Like, I don't know, I feel like this is like a better Deadpool in some ways, right? Like, I don't know, I don't know how they did it. But it's, oh man, I'm like, I enjoyed this movie way too much for how bad it is. But this is actually an interesting, I think, kind of question that I wanted to bring up, because you know, as we always do, we compare this to other things, and you know, I was thinking about this in comparison to Batman versus Superman, because it's my turn to bring it up. But essentially, right, like, I think this is a worse movie than Batman versus Superman, like, technically, and like, is probably the best way to put it.
Right.
But I am so much more entertained by this movie than I was by BVS. I know you're a big fan of BVS, but I thought BVS was just kind of like serviceable but mediocre.
Fair enough.
And I the question that I kind of ask is, like, does that make, what does that say about, like, the actual quality of the movie, right? Like,
so this is an interesting kind of thesis I have on like the quality of, like, art and stuff like that, which is baked into some of the other things we've talked about, like how, you know, like, I don't think Star Wars is that good, like, from a quality standpoint, right? It is good for its time, right? And we talked about that, like, iconically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, humans just get better at things the more we do things, right? And so the movies we are making today are better than the movies that we made 40 years ago. That is normal and to be expected. And what we do is we kind of put on a filter, right? Like our kind of iconic filter. And we say, oh, well, in 1977, this was really revolutionary and innovative and groundbreaking. So for its time, it was amazing. And I definitely agree with that kind of, like, idea or sentiment. Like, I mean, and I think Venom is a kind of a great example of that. I think if Venom had come out in the mid-90s, we would all be like, wow. You know what I mean? Just because it is coming out in a different kind of context and you know, culture and ecosystem when it comes to, like, movies. I also think movies in the 90s really fucking sucks. But anyway, but another piece of this kind of, like, quality thing is, like, pulling out the difference between I think this is good and I like this or I enjoyed this.
Sure.
Right? One of those is a set of criteria that we kind of, you know, none of this is objective, but it is more objective than the other version of, right? So it's a set of criteria that we say are objective, right? This has good cinematography, good editing, right? You know, a great soundtrack and an interesting plot, and, like, the acting was amazing, or, you know, like, whatever it else kind of things, right? Like,
right.
And we assign some kind of, like, neutral sort of criteria and, like, metrics as a sort of culture to that sort of stuff. But then there's a whole nother set of criteria that get assigned to these things that are the did I like it criteria, right? And that set of criteria are your tastes, right? So, like, I have a tough time with movies that are like Lady Bird, right, which are super small, very contained stories about very, you know, like, small, low-stakes stories about small, low-stakes lives. And I know certain people can get into that, but I have a tough time getting into it, and I have a really easy time getting into, like, the over-the-top melodrama and bombast of a Batman versus Superman, right? Because, like, I like opera when it comes to these sort of things. But those are my tastes, right? And so when I'm talking about quality, a lot of the time I'm pulling my tastes out of it, and I say, yep, Moonlight was the best movie of 2016. But when I look at my tastes instead of that quality, and I say, well, what movie did I like the most in 2016? Obviously, it's Batman vs. Superman. And that creates a kind of matrix, right? Where you can say, okay, well, a movie can have quality independent of how much I like it, right? And I think when you have a movie that you like a lot, but whose quality you recognize is bad, that is a guilty pleasure, right? And then the opposite of that, which is a movie that is very good, but that you don't like all that much, is, I don't know, but there's not a name for that, but that also happens. And so I think Venom is a perfect example of a true blue guilty pleasure. It is awful. from a qualitative standpoint, but it has a lot of stuff in there that are appealing to and on an enjoyment level, right? Like I think it shares a lot of traits with stuff like The Room, such that a subculture, I guess, of tastes, let's say, like a subculture of tastes can kind of like form around it, and we can put it on best of the worst lists or whatever, especially as like a huge like mainstream blockbuster. But I think that it is. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm getting what you're saying. I think that's all valid. Maybe this kind of speaks to like the deeper purpose of media, right? Like, you know, it is at some level to entertain. So if it entertains, and first question, would you count Transformers as a guilty pleasure? Because I kind of saw some parallels between like the hate Transformers gets and this movie in some ways, right? Like,
you know, to be honest with you, in a lot of ways, yeah. I kind of like the Transformers movies, which is to say that I think the culture is too hard on them, and that they are not the worst things ever. I think the worst movies ever are forgettable movies, right? So I'm actually more inclined to say that Transformers is good, and, you know, something from 4 years ago that came and went, and we completely forgot. The Battleship movie. Do you remember the Battleship movie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a bad movie, and it is more proof of Hollywood is really bad and out of ideas than Transformers is, right? Like, whether or not you like Michael Bay, and I kind of do and I kind of don't, I think he is at least enough of an auteur to be memorable, and that kind of like speaks to something in the Transformers movies that also make them memorable and interesting, whereas movies like, you know, Battleship are not. But I definitely get the same sort of feeling out of Transformers that I do out of, like, Venom. Like, there's a lot of stuff in Transformers, right? In Transformers 2, John Turturro, famed character actor John Turturro, who has Oscar buzz all the time, you know, and it's like he is a well-respected member of this industry, is climbing the Great Pyramids of Giza with a radio, and he is whispering in the radio to the United States military, "I'm directly under the enemy scrotum." Like, what? You know what I mean? So I think the same thing is true for Transformers than it is for Venom. But I think the difference is that Transformers is like a true blue beloved property, and it is something that could have been done well and earnestly. I mean, just look at the way people are reacting to the Bumblebee trailer for proof of this, right? So Transformers gets more visceral hate because it is an adaptation of a thing that people really like and enjoy. Venom is kind of not that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, Venom is like, he's popular, I guess, but he's not. I don't know.
So kind of in that vein, right? Like, I get what you're this guilty pleasure stuff. This relates to Transformers as well.
Okay.
This guilty pleasure thing when it's on a kind of like an individual basis, right? Like, you really like this really terrible movie, but it just like tickles your funny bone in the right way. Even though mostly people don't like it. And like, these are sort of, I guess, are movies that have like cult followings essentially. But is there a meaningful difference when like that seems to be like the movie going populace as a whole, right? Like for instance,
like, do we turn around on The Room and say, actually, The Room is a really good movie because of how many people go and watch it and enjoy it or whatever? Not
necessarily The Room, right? Because The Room. So I feel like there's an effective difference because the Room is trying to be earnest, and it's all unintentional, right? Sometimes Venom is trying to be funny. It just like has a bunch of like weird stuff along the way. But just to put it to
okay, I feel that. Okay, so for instance, I don't think Batman vs Superman is a great movie, right? Though I do think it is better than the movie going populist gives it credit for. But like, Batman vs Superman isn't something I would consider a guilty pleasure, and it's also not something I would consider on this sort of level, because at the end of the day, my enjoyment of Batman vs Superman boils down to being with the movie, if that makes sense, right? I get what Zack Snyder is going for. I think it's really cool and really interesting, and and the movie appropriately, shall I say, sells itself to me, right? But there's also this certain element of like, so this is interesting. There's a certain element of like The Room or like Venom where it is enjoyable despite itself.
Right.
Venom thinks it's cool. Venom thinks it's like edgy and like badass, right? And wants to be, you know, I can't even.
I don't know if Venom thinks it's edgy and badass at some level. I think Venom like kind of knows what it is. I don't think you get a line like you get this weird therapist like rom-com subplot if it's not a little bit self-aware, right? I also think it is less self-aware than it would need to be in order to justify everything in the movie, if that makes sense, right? Like I think it's like I don't you know, maybe like halfway, right? Like it is half like you know, like winking at itself, but doesn't realize that like it needs to be winking a whole lot harder in order for this whole thing to come together.
See, okay, so I think this kind of comes down to like turd in the wind.
Yeah.
This is my, you know what I mean? Like, I think Venom uses the turd in the wind line because, you know, whoever, right? Ruben Fleischer, Avi Arad, who's a huge piece of shit, by the way, is the producer of these movies. Looked at that line and went, oh, what a badass, what a cool line for a cool guy to say. Do you know what I mean? Whereas the rest of the movie going public looked at that line and bust out laughing because it is hilariously bad. Do you know what I mean? And like, I think that is it's kind of like fuck Batman, actually, from the Titans trailer, which I also get a similar, I also get a similar feelings from. I haven't seen Titans yet. I don't even know if it's fucking out. I have like the DC Universe stuff, but like, I don't know. There's just something about that line that just, the point of it is, oh, this is so cool. Look at Robin. He says fuck. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I see. I don't know if I agree with you about the turn in the wind line because, like I said, I think like the like weird inanity of that line fits very well with that version of like this character of Venom that's been presented to us.
So you think the turn in the wind line was like intentionally doofy?
It could It could be. Like, I think that's a distinct possibility. I also think it's possible that, like, they made this, like, intentionally doofy Venom, or they made this doofy Venom completely by mistake, and, you know, like, I'm just rolling with it because I think it's great, right? But part of me wants to believe that, like, they made Venom as doofy as he is for the laughs, right? Like, this, you know, this feels very, like, appropriate for like someone trying to ape a Marvel movie, right? Like that like you get that level of like dumb humor in there, right?
Interesting.
And, you know, I'd also believe that it was completely by accident. And like I said, I feel like it's like maybe like 50 to 75% intentional and like 50 to 25% like, you know,
I guess I feel like I almost sort of wonder if did Tom Hardy voice Venom? Who
I don't know.
Venom? That's something I want to like quickly find out.
Yeah, that would be
because I think it has to do more with maybe the execution and performance and delivery. Yeah, so Tom Hardy also voices the Venom symbiote, okay? So here's my idea. I bet. Man, I don't know how. Okay, I think this is Tom Hardy knowing that he's in this kind of a movie, but a lot of the other people around him don't. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
The screenwriter, the producers, the director, right? So in a lot of ways, I think maybe it is just unique to him that is able to, you know, like Tom Hardy understands how like weird and goofy and stupid this all is, and is almost kind of making fun of it in a way.
Okay,
but I think
that.
There is an earnest belief from, you know, Ruben Fleischer, from, you know, Avi Arad, from whoever else, right, that like this is a cool movie that all of the teenagers will get really into because they shop at Hot Topic or whatever.
Yeah, okay. I could believe that. I
also think that if this movie had come out, this is kind of like a hot take. I think that if this movie had come out maybe in like 2004, it would have landed a lot better. Like, I think we would be having a kind of prequels argument about this movie if it had come out in 2004. Because I think if it had come out right in the middle of, like, the Linkin Park angsty teenager phase.
Our high school phase. Ages.
Yeah. I think people would have been like, "Oh, I love Venom," like, I think that would have been legit and real.
So not to veer too far, but to get back to the original conversation, my point was kind of like, if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes page, Venom has like 90% audience liked it with a 33% critical score, right? Like, and just to kind of get back to your point about like the guilty pleasures, when you've got like kind of like general consensus that the movie is still good despite itself, does that change the way that we should evaluate it in some way?
I think it should, but it doesn't. Specifically because I think people have a hard time sort of separating out these pieces for themselves, right? It is in the same way that it is hard for someone to say Star Wars, in the same way that it's hard for somebody to say, how could you tell me that Kung Fu Panda is a better movie than Star Wars, right? Well, I think when you lay it out in a sense that's like, listen, this is a movie that was able to learn from Star Wars and also the 30 years of Star Wars-like movies that came out. So yeah, its beats are tighter and the character arcs are more sharp and focused. And Star Wars deserves a lot of credit for kind of being like the first one and everything like that. But it makes sense that over the course of the intervening 30 years, filmmakers would learn from that movie and be able to make a better version of like that movie. And you might be able to convince somebody of that, right? But I think people have a tough time sort of separating out this idea of kind of quality and taste, right? And I think that there's also sort of like a knee-jerk reaction to that, right? Because you hear that and you say, well, no, right? I have good taste. Like, you want your taste to feel quality, right? So you say, no, it's not that I like a movie that's bad. I have good tastes. This movie is good. Therefore, I like it. I like good movies. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's just kind of like a symptom of uncritical thinking that sort of like revolves around, this stuff.
I feel that. I also think that like there's an aspect to this that like I think people are more willing to make those concessions for funny things, right? Like I feel like if you really like a, quote unquote bad drama, right? Like there's less room to work with, because like a comedy that is bad that still manages to be funny for the wrong reasons still is a successful comedy at some level, right? Like it's
yeah.
I don't think you can be, appropriately dramatic for the wrong reason. I just don't think that you can get that to fall out.
I don't know that it's even possible to get invested in drama against the movie's sort of wishes, if that makes sense. Like, if we're using that earlier kind of thing, like, I like Batman vs. Superman because I am with the movie and I am with the director, right? I see what it's trying to do and I appreciate it and I like it. I don't know that, but with something like Venom or The Room or whatever, I see what they're trying to do, but they don't, and I'm laughing at it, right? For being so bad.
Yeah.
Or being so ineffectual, or being so whatever it is, right? I don't know that you can have kind of you can get invested drama out of a movie that is trying. Like what? Like how would that?
I'm
work?
thinking about that.
Like
I'm think like I don't think this ever happens, but I could envision like a plot where you get invested in the villain, even though you're not supposed to, right? Like the director's trying to paint that person as like terrible.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean, right? Like all of the kind of like, oh, whoever, like character X was right all along,
right?
Kind of yeah. That would make sense. That would be a pretty interesting example. I also think to a certain extent that maybe like in a movie that's a comedy, but that really, but like all comedies need a little bit of drama in order to kind of like work, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe you get invested in. Like, so for instance, Superbad. Did you watch Superbad when you were in high school?
At some point, yeah.
Yeah, Superbad came out like 2007, 2008, like right when I was like a junior, senior, right? And I have very fond memories of that movie, but I wonder how intentional those kind of memories were, because like I thought Superbad was an incredibly sharp and true to form depiction of what my high school experience was like, right? Like I was watching all these other movies that kind of approximated it and sort of guessed at it, right? Like all of like, whatever the teenage movies you know, like the American Pie movies or Never Been Kissed or something like that, you know, like any of these movies about sort of like high schoolers. But Superbad was a movie that I connected to like on a real level. Like I was like, wow, this is me and my friends. This is what we are like, but in movie form, right? And so maybe hypothetically speaking, you can connect with the drama in a comedy against the movie's wishes. I also find Superbad super funny, so I really don't know how far that goes.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like it's possible, but it is much, much harder to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think that we live in kind of like a postmodern kind of irony sort of existence, and we're actually moving out of it in a lot of ways, in the sense that, like, you know, a lot of stuff I felt like earlier, like when I was in high school and college, was enjoyed ironically against its wishes, right? And that we've kind of almost circled around back to earnestness in a way. But that's like a hard thing to kind of like wrap around, right? Like I don't get into a show like Modern Family that's a very straightforward sitcom as easily as I get into a show like Community, right? Which is very like postmodern, reflexive sitcom that's making all these comments about sitcom structure. But while there are sitcoms that are like Community that take down sitcoms, right? Seinfeld is actually a very good example of this, right? That ultimately undermine and take down the kind of art form of the sitcom. Community does the opposite, where it reaffirms the sitcom and what the sitcom is and means and can represent to people and to things. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. I think I follow you there. Yeah.
Not that Seinfeld isn't funny or anything like that, but, you know, if insofar as the point of Seinfeld is these characters never learn any lessons, right? They're all, you know, they're people that don't really change.
Terrible people.
They're terrible people. Bad stuff happens to them all the time, and it's just funny to watch that or whatever, right? Like, I think that that's a very, like, you know, 90s Generation X disillusioned, disaffected kind of take on that. But what I see now is stuff like The Office or Parks and Rec or Community, where like these characters are flawed, right, and they are funny, and they are also kind of like self-referential to like the art form or whatever, but at the end of the day it is you know, it's affirming, right? Like Michael Scott may be, you know, a doofus or whatever, and we laugh at him or whatever, but at the end of the day, like, he's like a sweet guy with like a good heart or whatever, and we're supposed to like him.
Yeah, but I don't think it's universal, right? Like, Always Sunny is incredibly popular, and it's definitely in that Seinfeld vein of like, these are terrible people that you don't care. You don't care if anything terrible happens to them because they're terrible people, and it's okay to laugh at them, right?
No, yeah, that's definitely that's definitely like fair. That's definitely true.
Yeah, but I take your point. I don't know how much, if like they're necessarily separated by time frame. Like I bet you that there's like an ebb and flow between when one style is in dominance and when it's not. Because even The Age of Seinfeld, right? Like there was Friends, which is a very kind of like earnest sitcom.
Yeah, very straightforward sitcom.
So yeah, I bet you it's just kind of like as depending on people's attitudes, we're just, you know, like cultural tastes, like one gains power, one loses power, right? Because I do think there are more affirming sitcoms, and they're more popular right now than, like, Always Sunny is popular, but like it does not have like the cumulative kind of power of like your Office, your PNR, your Community.
Yeah. And there are obviously like more examples on either side or whatever. But really the point I'm trying to make is that I think our culture deals with irony a lot easier than it deals with earnestness. And that I think we are moving out of that phase, sort of, right? But like The Room came out right in the middle of like this idea that you could enjoy. You watch something ironically.
Right.
And in a certain sense, I think Venom kind of follows in suit. But I wonder if you can watch a comedy ironically because you like the drama in it or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know.
Because I feel like for a lot of instances, for these kinds of guilty pleasures, they are things that you are like earnestly getting into, and you're saying like, oh, this is like an underrated, this is an underrated gem, to use flippant movie people film Twitter circle jerk about it.
Yeah. I don't know. Interesting. Very the media theory is always like interesting to me, right? Because like
Yeah.
the primary like I said it kind of before, but the primary purpose of movies is to entertain, and so like splitting out like those things is always an interesting talk.
Well, so I think I am unsure of how much I like the idea that the primary purpose of a movie is to entertain. I think all media has one of three purposes blended together, right? To be informative, to be persuasive, and to be entertaining. And I don't know that any one of those has like a necessary sort of primacy over the others. Because I think when you have a movie that's just entertaining, it is forgettable, right? And you need a movie that is some way, insofar as like kind of informative means true, right? Like you need a movie that is true to that is like there's got to be something else there than just it was fun.
Yeah, so I think maybe we're using entertainment in different senses, because like I would say that if a movie is just entertaining, it's forgettable, then it wasn't that entertaining, right? Like it didn't leave that mark on you. And I would say that like those other ingredients you mentioned like push the movie towards being more entertaining. Yeah, no, that's I take your point. I think we were just using slightly different definitions of entertaining.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I will certainly say that Venom was entertaining.
Yeah, Venom was entertaining. I probably, at the end of gun to my head, I probably enjoyed Venom more than Deadpool 2 and Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Yeah, no, I'd agree 100%.
I laughed. I think I laughed a lot more in this movie than in those two movies. God. There's so much stuff in here. Oh my god. Like the part where he's being chased through the woods and there are like the guards. I really enjoy putting myself in the shoes of the guards in movies like this, because you can tell that they're being just used as props and nobody's thinking about them or whatever, right? But there's this part where the guards are in like a fucking dune buggy or something, and they jump off of they jump off of a ramp, and I can just imagine to myself that those two guards are freaking out, because why would they ever jump off of that ramp? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make any sense. Like one of the guards is like, "Yo, dude, look at this ramp. I'm totally gonna jump after this fucking like alien nightmare creature." "No, dude, don't do it. No, dude, I'm gonna do it. Oh, it's so sweet." And like, you know what I mean? Like nobody.
They also
why?
They also power slide into the fucking forest, right? Like,
Yeah.
like what?
Oh my god.
Oh man.
Oh.
So there was a moment at the beginning that I thought was a missed opportunity, and they got it like so close, right? Like so, his boss says have a nice life, and someone else, the CEO says have a nice life. Then he gets fired, and his boss says have a nice life, and then his girlfriend breaks up with him, and I thought that she was going to say have a nice life, right? And that would be like the the three references, and then she doesn't. I'm like, what? What was that? And then
he says it at the very end.
Yeah,
as the guy's dying. Like, I get that it's like throwing it back in his face or whatever, but excuse me. And I get that he's like throwing it back in his face or whatever, but like it's just not a very, I don't know. I think they just think it sounds cool and it doesn't.
Yeah, I think it would have worked better if like it was only the CEO dude. Like they either needed to do all three or they needed to do just the CEO dude. Like the boss doing it really throws off the rhythm. But I'm just holding there waiting for it to happen. It was frustrating. Because it felt like that would be a slam dunk, right? You get like three right in a row, and this movie's so weird. I love it, but it's so weird.
I also like how Eddie Brock is like, oh man, my life sucks now and I have all these overdue bills. And then it like gets to the interior of his apartment and he has this giant, awesome apartment. And I'm just kind of like, hey man, maybe if you don't have like this super awesome loft and you actually like have like a shitty, ratty apartment, maybe I would feel a little bit different about it. And I can tell that they wanted the big apartment because they needed to do that fight scene in the apartment. Right? God, this movie.
Because it's funny because like the building looked about right, and like
yeah,
like you said, everything up until you actually get into the apartment seems about right. They could have, they were that close to like making it into like a real kind of shitty San Francisco apartment. Although that probably still would have been super fucking expensive because of San Francisco, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, I was wondering how much they were going to go in on kind of like because obviously we have friends that live in San Francisco. I feel like I have more than the average knowledge about what's going on in San Francisco at any given time. And so like I actually thought the homeless thing was kind of cute. Yeah. I was like, "Oh, I get that." Like that's a real, like that's a real thing.
And I feel like there would be a number of people who'd be like, "That's a great way to deal with the homeless." Because they're
just kill them for science.
Yeah, no, they're.
I mean, I actually sort of thought that that's what they were. At first I thought this movie was like a kind of a Silicon Valley, sort of disrupt the market billionaire kind of takedown, right? Like this is kind of like the Elon Musk takedown, and he has that whole speech where he's like, "Oh man, we're doing science, and I'm gonna put my hand on the fucking glass, and you're gonna put your hand on the glass, like we're in Titanic or something."
Yeah.
And your sacrifice is gonna make the world a better place or whatever. But then they didn't really go anywhere. It didn't really go anywhere with that.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because I thought that whole thing was doofy too, right? In the same kind of like vein, I feel like the Mad Genius thing was like played up a little bit, like in the same way that like Venom is doofy, that he felt kind of doofy too, which is why I think maybe it was a little bit less just on Tom Hardy. Because that whole I was reminded of like Raul Julia in the Street Fighter movie, as Bison, right? Like the same type of like corn on top of cheese, right? Like I could totally see this character being like, for you it was the most important day of your life. For Bison it was Tuesday, right? Like it just man, I hope it was intentional. That way they can make another one and I can laugh at it more.
I mean, did you like the post-credits sequence? Did you stay for
for Carnage? Yeah.
Oh my god. It would have been funny if I didn't know that, because it got reported. It was like widely reported 3 months ago that Woody Harrelson was going to play Carnage. They said Woody Harrelson was going to play Carnage in the Venom movie, and then it was later corrected to be, oh no, he just has a small role. And I was like, wait, really? The only other interesting character in this like whole universe is being in the second movie? Because Carnage, like, there is some I don't know who Riot is. I read a ton of comics, and I have never seen Riot before. I read the comic Venom versus Carnage, which introduces a third symbiote called Toxin.
There's a bunch of symbiotes. Like there's
a whole bunch of them, right?
Like,
but I've never seen Riot before.
Yeah,
and so the idea that they are saving Riot for the sequel is kind of like in the Green Lantern movie, saving Sinestro for the sequel. It's like, listen, you don't start a Batman movie by doing, Victor Zsasz. You do a headliner. Do a fucking headliner. And the only headliner in the Venom universe is Carnage. Insofar as you're going to make Venom I
think Riot's one of the. I'm looking at it now because he's one of there was like a team of symbiotes that's Scream, Lasher, Phage, Agony, and Riot. I think they're like cops, if I'm reading this right. Yeah, there was something like that, right? Like there was a I don't know if it was a mini series or a series that revolved around them as like a plot point. So I guess it's like a shout out to super fans.
Yeah, I guess. The cool thing, so the thing with Venom is that the Venom Eddie Brock synthesis in the comics is actually not super great. In the same way that the Spider-Man symbiote synthesis is not super great, which is why Venom is typically not very goopy in like the comics, right? Like he can the symbiote can actually create webbing, right, and create sort of Spider-Man's webbing for a while. And Venom does that exact same thing, right? But he doesn't get like goopy because the symbiote is at its core, it just wants to like eat and kill everything. And Spider-Man, or like Peter Parker and Eddie Brock, both hold it back from that, right? Because Peter Parker is a good person, Eddie Brock thinks he's a good person, and so they are relatively kind of like whole beings with it. But the thing that makes Carnage unique, and the thing that makes Carnage so dangerous, is that Carnage bonds to Cletus Cassidy, who's a serial killer, right? He's like a sociopathic serial killer who doesn't give a fuck. So he has a much more complete bond with the symbiote itself, and therefore can unlock its like full goopy potential. So like most of the comic drawings of the Eddie Brock era of Venom that you will see are very, kind of like contained. Whereas the most drawings of that same era of Carnage are always have goop flying and going everywhere.
Does Carnage have a separate personality in not Carnage, Venom have a separate personality in the comics?
Yes, ish, kind of. In the sense that like the Carnage symbiote is specifically worse than Venom. In the comic, Venom versus Carnage, for instance. So the symbiotes are asexual,
right?
And they reproduce asexually. So Venom just builds up enough energy to one day poop out Carnage, and then Carnage bonds with Cletus Cassidy.
Right.
The Carnage, the way the symbiotes work is that they are always more powerful than the last one, right? So like whenever a symbiote quote unquote gives birth, the symbiote it gives birth to is more powerful than it is. And so hypothetically speaking, Carnage is more powerful than Venom just because it is like Venom's like kid, and then Carnage is the one that spits out Toxin, and Toxin is more powerful than both of them.
Okay. Sorry. I mean, like in terms of personality, does Venom have a unique, identifiable personality outside of Eddie Brock, like he does in the movie in the comics?
I don't actually kind of know.
Okay.
I want to say yes, but I don't know. I mean, yes in the sense that it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same, I guess, backstory in a way. Like a lot of Venom's whole thing is kind of like a jilted ex-lover with Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
Venom wants to take down Spider-Man specifically because Spider-Man abandoned it. So there's that whole idea, I guess, to it or whatever. Carnage doesn't give a fuck. Carnage just wants to kill dudes and eat their brains.
Okay. Yeah, well, I feel like we've run over on the Spider-Man, or the Venom portion. You have any final thoughts on it?
I really don't. I think we got there.
Yeah, all right, sounds good. So, in that case, how was your week?
My week was good. So you know what? I want to talk about something, and it's gonna be crazy. I want to talk about a book.
Oof.
I started listening. I didn't actually read a book. It was an audiobook. I started listening to the audiobook. God, what's it called? I think it's called American Kingpin. The Epic Hunt for the Criminal Mastermind Behind the Silk Road. Have you ever heard of this book?
No.
Do you know who Ross Ulbricht is?
Oh, yeah. No, I know about this. Like, yeah. I calling him a kingpin's interesting considering that the takes I usually see are of the kind of like Ross Ulbricht really didn't do much wrong, and then it was like he was being hunted down to be made an example of more than anything else.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I would recommend this book then.
Yeah.
I think this book, this book paints a very simultaneously flattering and unflattering, I guess I would say, picture of Ross Ulbricht, because you kind of understand where he's coming from, and he feels so normal. And maybe this is just because, like, I am also, you know, like a white guy that went to college, and I know plenty of people who are kind of like, quote unquote, like this person. In a weird way, I almost have the same feeling of have you ever heard of the banality of evil?
No, I haven't.
The Banality of Evil is a book written about Nazis at the end of the Holocaust, and it's not people like Hitler, right, or anybody on those kinds of levels. It's specifically about how, you know, when we think of what we think of as evil, right, we dehumanize it naturally, and we say, oh, these people are monsters, right? But at the end of the day, like, real evil is perpetrated by very relatable kinds of people, right? And this contributes to all things, you know, this contributes to things in a lot of different ways, right? Like Brock Turner gets a different sentence because he is a relatable person to a judge who is also a Stanford alum, right?
Right.
Than someone who is someone who does the exact same thing but is not quite as, like, quote unquote, like, relatable.
Right.
Because Ross Ulbricht is truly a monster by the end of the book. He doesn't start there. He gets there, and the book is very well researched and insanely like it is really detailed. And they talk about some of the some of the interviews and some of the different techniques that they use to make it kind of like narrativized. Like the writer was going to excuse me. The writer was going to, like, almanacs and stuff to get what the weather was like, where they were standing, you know, at specific kind of, like, dates and times. But yeah, it was a really good book. It was super interesting. I cannot believe no one has made a movie out of this story, because it is such a good story.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I know there's a bunch of stuff about, like, prosecutorial misconduct with specifically, like, I think it's the murder for hire aspect of the story. I know his mom is kind of active in defending his relative. I think like the drug kingpin stuff, I think, is mostly undisputed, but you get disagreements about how wrong that really is, you know. Just, you know, for full clearness, I have heard of this stuff mostly through Reason, which is a libertarian publication, and so they have
obviously Ross is primarily motivated by his kind of like ANCAP libertarian viewpoint.
It, like, the stuff I've all read is that, like, they kind of railroaded him in a way that is that would be similar to something that you'd hear on, like, I guess, like Making of a Murderer is the type of thing that I've heard it being compared to. They suppressed a lot of stuff, but, you know, who I am interested because I would like to hear that other side, since I've mostly only heard it in the one direction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how important the murders were, because he had a life sentence for some of the charges, and then 40 years on top of that for some of the other charges. But I don't know what it is. Basically what he does is he commissions people to be murdered, because he creates criminal contacts with the Hells Angels and hackers that are stealing Bitcoin from him and stuff like that. He hires the Hells Angels to kill those people.
I think the controversy there is that was never prosecuted, right? That was dropped. So the big kind of overarching point from, like, this, you know, this libertarian perspective is those charges were dropped, and he was never charged on them, but the judge used those charges to enhance his sentence.
Oh, I see what. Yeah. The judge used that as evidence, because the murder. I'm actually looking it up now.
Yeah.
Because it was conspiracy to traffic narcotics, money laundering, and computer hacking.
Right, which are all nonviolent charges, right? Like those are things that like you might like a life sentence for those things is probably arguable, right? Like we don't need to get into the super specifics of it, but the judge used the fact that he had been charged with, or he'd been charged with it, but he was never tried or convicted for it. He used the fact that he was charged with it to extend his sentence. Which is kind of like the other side of this coin. Interesting. No, I definitely down to kind of see it from the perspective where he's the villain. Because again, like a lot of this stuff comes from his mom, and his mom is obviously a biased kid.
So yeah, I mean, so part of this also is that I suspect you might read this book and say he's not the villain. He did get railroaded.
Okay.
Right. Because I've read this book and I see, because of like where my politics sort of lie, and I legitimately think that this kind of thing is, like, fairly monstrous. It's kind of like a Breaking Bad sort of story,
sure.
right? Where he starts off kind of like relatable, and I kind of understand where he's coming from, but very clearly the power and the thrill of it goes to his head. And the book addressed this, right? Like how hard it was for him to make the first call to have someone killed, right? But also how easy it was for him to continue having people killed down the line, right? And he justifies that to himself just by saying, right, they took something of mine, eye for an eye, therefore they need to be killed.
What's the source again? Like I said, I think that was never proven. Like, did he like admit to that, or is this just like narrow?
No, the sourcing of that. So when the FBI seized his laptop, they were able to get millions of chat logs that he had with all of these people around the site. And he had specifically a confidant named Variety Jones, who is a much more kind of typical, like much more typical bad guys, right? Variety Jones is a Canadian guy who has all of these kinds of stories that nobody really knows the truth of, about how much of a criminal badass he is or whatever. And he was doing a lot of this dark web stuff before the Silk Road came along. And he was also one of the people that suggested, I guess, to Ross to like end up killing people, and was part of like the leadership team that kind of like made him go down that path in a way. Even though the amount of money that Ross was making off of the Silk Road was kind of insane. Like, really, at the end of the day, like, hackers stealing $100,000 in Bitcoin from him is kind of immaterial, because he was just a multimillionaire by that point, and this stuff was pocket change.
Sure. All right, interesting. I'll have to give it a read. Do you have anything else with your week that you want to talk about?
I guess what did you do with your week? I just used like all my time, I feel like.
Yeah, no worries. I didn't do a ton. I went to Comic-Con yesterday. Nice. This will go up during the last day of Comic-Con. I did not go today, or I only went for one day. Saw some cool stuff. I don't know. I think I'm spoiled by Gen Con, because like, Gen Con's like you play a lot of games and whatever, right? And like the dealer hall is kind of like a thing you do, but it's like a short part of the activity. It feels like at Comic-Con, like the dealer's hall is like 90% of what you do there, plus like, and the panels are kind of more side things. And I don't know. It was not as fun to me as Gen Con is. It's also not as fun to me as various anime conventions I've been to. I think I like anime conventions because I like watching people cosplay. I think it's neat that when people put a lot of work into that kind of stuff, and I think the density is just higher of people doing cosplay at anime conventions. Also, because it is such an important part, I think there's more dedicated space to people showing off their cosplay. And they're usually not as kind of like, the anime industry isn't as big as kind of like the aggregated nerd industry. Like fucking Chevrolet and Geico had booths at New York Comic Con.
Wow.
But yeah, that was most of it. What else did I do? I played more Crusader Kings. I played more. I played a little bit of the Magic the Gathering Arena. That's a fine game. I don't know. Magic is one of those games where like I don't know. I have trouble getting deep into it, just because like there's it's got like kind of like the knowledge based problem of any trading card game except times a billion. So you know I've been goofing around with that. What else? Something I wanted to ask you about. Have you been following the Paizo updates to the playtest?
A little bit. It did what is it, V4? Or V4?
I think it's 3 or 4 came out recently. The big thing being the treat wounds application. I wanted to know what you thought of that.
I have not seen that. So it would break it down for me.
Okay, so the way treat wounds works is it's an application of the medicine skill, whatever it's called, and you can take 10 minutes and heal, I believe it's character level plus constitution worth of hit points. You have to make a check that scales with the healer's level.
Okay.
It's people are not happy about about the way that mechanic works, specifically the scaling works, but that's, I think, neither here nor there. It's not the interesting part to me. And you can do it as many times as you want, but it takes 10 minutes each time. But if you critically fail, they're bolstered against it, so you can't do it to them again.
Okay.
And they also reduce the time on like repairing things and identifying magic items to 10 minutes. So you've kind of got this thing where like while the guy's patching you up, you can be doing like a repair or like or an identification or something like that. Do you have any thoughts?
I think that's okay. I guess I'm a little. How often is a critical failure going to come up, do you think?
Not super often, but often enough since it's scaling with the DC is scaling with the character level. It basically they want this to be like the replacement for the Wand of Cure Light Wounds kind of situation.
Yeah. I guess I get it from that situation. I don't like the Wand of Cure Light Wounds, and I think it is. I don't know. I hope they balance the game a little bit around it. I like using hit points as a longer term resource, but if the idea is that hit points are going to be healed to full after every fight,
I feel like that'd be harder to do because that's like an hour or two of in-game time, right? Like maybe you can do that if you're on the road or like like not in a high stakes situation, but if you're in a dungeon, I think you can.
But are you gonna wait an hour to spam heal?
Yeah, and like
that's actually kind of fair.
Are there consequences to that? I actually think this will play really well with the Angry GM's exploration rules. He basically has a system where like kind of every time the party stops to do something, everybody chooses something to do, and like 10 minutes passes, and 10-minute spells fall off, and longer spells have 10 minutes detracted from the duration. And he has this dice pool that you build up. It's usually D6s. You can change the dice size if you want it to be more or less dangerous. And at any time that something could go wrong, I think it is. I think I have this article up. Hold on, let me double check. Whenever the party attempts allowed or rushed tasks, the GM rolls for complications. And I think once it hits 6 dice, you also roll them. And if any of them come up a 1, something happens, right? And then the dice pool, I think once you roll, the dice pool clears, regardless if anything happens or not.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like I'll probably end up integrating some form of like, if too much time passes and they're just sitting in the dungeon, bad stuff, happens or whatever. So we're like, maybe you get one free 10-minute, rest, but like other ones you risk a patrol coming, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, right?
So
in the same way.
I can speak. One of my 5e GM uses the angry rules, and I can vouch that it's great because like Chris, the GM, will just like pull a d6 out and put it in the pool like very dramatically, and we're all like, oh no, fuck, do we want to keep fucking around, right? Like I think it's actually a really good system. I'll link in the show notes. and then everybody, including you, can read it. And obviously, they're not building this into the core Pathfinder rules, but I think that this would dovetail in very nice to make that super meaningful. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Did you have anything else you want to say about it?
No, that's kind of fair. I haven't been keeping up with it because, frankly, I haven't really been doing a lot of stuff. I've been worried about, or not worried about, but I've just had my time and attention focused elsewhere. Did you see the extended Aquaman trailer at New York Comic Con?
No, I didn't do anything particularly Comic-Con at Comic-Con because there were lines everywhere.
Okay, because they released a 5-minute extended trailer for Aquaman, which I actually think is kind of awesome. I sort of wish that instead of getting 3 trailers of like variously recut footage 2 minutes each, I sort of like here's a teaser, it's 2 minutes long. Here's a bigger 5-minute, sort of trailer for the movie. I find myself being a giant hypocrite because there's a little bit of like bathos humor in it, but it feels good to me and I laugh really hard, and I'm like, oh, but I make fun of this so bad in all these other movies and I get really mad about it, and I can tell that once Aquaman comes out I'm gonna be like, oh, the humor was great.
Yeah, we were joking, what is it, what's Venom confirmed better than Aquaman, just to rustle your jimmies.
Yeah, I am extremely excited. I can't wait. Obviously because Aquaman is my favorite superhero. I really like Jason Momoa. I like basically everything I've seen out of this movie so far. Like Black Manta, man. Oh God. Anyway,
so a thought that a friend of the cast, Rohan, had that I thought was kind of insightful, a little bit surprising, was that it looks kind of like an off-brand Thor 1. Which is...
that's actually kind of fair. I mean, in a lot of ways, Thor... I think the main comparison is going to be Black Panther. I'm pretty sure I know what the plot of the movie is going to be, though I guess I won't say it because in the case that my speculation is a spoiler. And so I think it is going to be a reverse Black Panther. There is also a lot of, like, Thor to it. I mean, Thor has always been my favorite Marvel character, so... the kind of, like the otherworldliness of Asgard mirrored by the otherworldliness of Atlantis definitely makes like a certain amount of sense. Yeah, but though they're also like different in key ways. Like one of the cool things about Atlantis that I always enjoyed is, like Atlantis is like really, they're right in a way, but they're also like very like bigoted against the surface world. And so there's always that tension and push and pull for Aquaman. Where he grew up on the surface, right, but he is also Atlantean and like the rightful king to the Atlantean throne, and Atlanteans think that the surface world are awful. They're polluting the planet, they're like destroying these oceans and stuff like that, and so Atlantis always wants to like fuck up the surface world and be like, hey, stop being jerks, this is our place, obviously. And I like that tension a lot better than the kind of like milquetoast, oh, Asgard and humans, we get along just fine.
Fair enough.
In Thor stuff.
Is the general world aware of Atlantis in DC?
No.
Okay.
Well, so it depends. Obviously, so like where in the continuity you kind of are, because like so for instance in kind of like mainline DC continuity from like the 80s, from like 1986 to 2000-ish, like 2011 I think is really when that continuity sort of like dies. Aquaman reveals himself pretty quickly. He's a member of the UN, right? That's a whole sort of storyline. Magic exists, and everybody knows magic exists. Atlantis is the center of magic on Earth, and it's the center of magic on Earth, and it's like where sorcerers go and like come from, right? Like all like the most powerful magicians in the DC universe like reference and name check like Atlantis all the time. But yeah, there's like a bunch of stuff. Like there's this one actually thing where Aquaman like sends a tidal wave to Pearl Harbor in a Superboy comic, because Superboy does something like really stupid, and he ends up like fucking up a bunch of shit. And it's one of those things where like in comics, because everything like the stakes are so big that nobody really thinks about the fact that like, you know, America went to war over an enemy nation attacking Pearl Harbor, but they just kind of brush it off in the Superboy comic.
Wait, really? I thought that was just going to be like, that sounds to me like the most on the nose kind of thing, right? Declaration of war. Like,
no, it's literally, I think it's literally that Superboy is just like in Hawaii, but then something happens like with a missile or something, and it like does something to like fuck up, you know, Superboy does something stupid. It fucks up an Atlantis something, and then Aquaman comes and basically spanks him for being like a rowdy teenager. But because this is the scale of Superboy and Aquaman, that includes Aquaman sending a fucking tidal wave. it's a whole thing. But then, you know, like much later in the continuity, right? When Aquaman's brother Orm is in charge of when he's king of Atlantis, he sends a tidal wave to the East Coast that like destroys Boston. Because of like there's a United States missile test that destroys an Atlantean colony or something in the Pacific, and it's like vengeance for that, and that is taken dead serious, and everyone is like, wow, holy shit, this is some like war crime atrocity stuff.
Interesting. How does Orm become king? Do they like take turns? Is that
sort of. Like Aquaman falls in and out of his kingship.
Okay.
So like for instance, they actually reveal in a Justice League comic that the person who sank Atlantis was actually Aquaman himself, and he had to, because they all go back in time 3,000 years ago to when Atlantis sank. And they have to defeat a super powerful sorceress who is draining all of the water in the world to Atlantis, and so she would end up killing all of the surface dwellers or whatever. And so the only way to defeat her, and Aquaman was turned into an enchanted body of water at the time, is they take Aquaman from the enchanted body of water, add him to the ocean, so that the entire ocean is a body of is his body, and he sinks Atlantis in order to make her spell fail and allow people not to die.
I'm going to let you know that sounds incredibly stupid.
I understand that sounds incredibly stupid, but it's really awesome. Okay, there's also a little bit more to it. It's not even just that she's draining water. It's that she's draining water from the present, and in the past, 3,000 years ago, he needs to sink Atlantis in order to, like, ripple forward through time to defeat her in the present. So it's actually even stupider than it sounds, but it's also awesome, and you just gotta trust me on this. But anyway, after that happens, everyone is like, oh shit, you're the reason that Atlantis sank, and then Aquaman becomes a criminal from Atlantis, because obviously he committed the crime of sinking Atlantis. And then Orm comes into power, and then there's a reset. And I think that this is kind of the continuity that we're going to be dealing with in the movie, where Aquaman is a surface hero with Atlantean ties, and he was king of Atlantis for a little bit, but he abdicated the throne to his brother Orm because he kind of didn't really fit in, and he was like a very fish out of water. So then he's just being like a superhero running around with the Justice League or whatever, and then Orm is like, fuck you, I'm attacking Boston or whatever, and Aquaman needs to reassert his kingship in order to prevent war between the surface world and Atlantis.
Wouldn't he be the opposite of a fish out of water?
I mean, sure.
It's just a funny turn of phrase.
Yeah.
But
so, it's a whole thing.
Interesting.
Well, I'm very excited to go into like the minutia of like Aquaman lore whenever that movie comes out and we get into the podcast. I'm sure.
I'm sure we'll talk about Aquaman some more next week, given that's our 3-year anniversary. And I think we've decided it's a hype train episode.
Yeah.
And we won't restrict it to video games. So we can talk about that more next week. That sound good to you?
That sounds good to me.
All right. Well, if you'd like to talk to us and tell us what you're hyped for, what you thought of Venom, what you thought of any of the things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at podcast@somederpsplaygame.com or somederpsplaygame@gmail.com. You can go to our website, somederpsplaygame.com, and it basically just lists this podcast, but hopefully at some point we'll put something else interesting up there. You can follow us on SoundCloud. You can follow us on Twitch. At some point we will finish Hell's Rebels. What else? You should rate us and review us on iTunes because it will help us get found by people instead of just SoundCloud listen selling services. And like this on YouTube because I've started exporting and uploading these to YouTube. And that link will be in the description. We don't have enough subscribers to get a custom URL, so it's just the auto-generated one. So I can't. I'm not gonna bother giving it to you. The orally. That sounds bad. Anyway, buddy, do you have anything you wanted to promote?
I have nothing else I'm looking to promote.
In that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.